All right. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. This is part of the event series that we're running with the Product Alliance and in the meetup groups that yes, I'm guessing some of you are in different groups that we've shared these events with. And I'm happy to welcome you here to this new event. And today we're going to talk about the common pitfalls deploying and using product analytics tools. And we've decided to spice things up a bit. And I wanted to have someone who's also a real expert in the field of analytics. So I've invited Glenn. Hi, Glenn.
Hi, Yoav. Great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, of course, a pleasure to have you with us. And I see that people are, as always, joining a little bit late. So let's do this. Let's start out with a quick introduction. Let's do this. I'll introduce you and see how well I do this, and you add into it, and then I'll put you on the spot, and you have to introduce me.
Okay.
So Glenn Vanderliden. I hope I said it right.
That's correct.
So from Belgium, co-founder and also the CEO, right, of Human37?
I'm not the CEO. I'm not the CEO. I'm one of the co-founders, and I lead basically all of the operational services. But I'm not the CEO, fortunately or fortunately.
Okay, so I almost promoted you. Next time, maybe.
Not sure if it's a promotion, though.
Yeah, good concept. So like I said, from Brussels in Belgium, Human37, you haven't been around for too long as a firm, but you've been doing analytics for quite a long time before this with Semetis. And
Correct.
yeah, Glenn is one of the experts in the field of analytics, also working a lot with CDPs. Also a lot of experience with the field of advertising, which I try to stay away from. And yeah, a really good expert to have this bashing of heads over these few concepts that we wanted to discuss today. Yeah, so happy to have you with me.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here. So I guess now it's my turn to be put on the spot. So Yoav, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, actually. Yechiam?
Yeah, not bad.
Not bad. Founding partner, if I'm correct, from the Product Alliance. Actually, Yoav and I only met, I would say, like 9 months ago, maybe a bit earlier, like online, keeping tabs on each other's content and doing stuff. Very deep in the product analytics space, both on strategic and operational level, based in Israel, lots of clients in Israel. And actually, it's funny that you put AD in there, but you've been in the space for quite a while. In Dutch we say, or in French we say, un ancien, which means that you've been there for a very long time. Voila.
Yeah, I've been here since the dinosaurs. Yeah, so today, as the title of this webinar suggests, we're going to talk about not the good things, but the bad things or things that can go wrong. And unfortunately, there are quite a few things that can go wrong. And we're going to talk about things that we are seeing as consultants. We see it with our clients. Some of the things are very trivial, and you might say, hey, it's too trivial. This will never happen to me. I think other ones might happen even to those who are pretty experienced with analytics of any types of tools. We're not going to talk about a specific tool today, but just a general concept of things that can go wrong. So basically, we're going to try to discuss 4 things today. Oh, just in terms of the scope of this discussion. We're going to talk about, let's say, 25 minutes about these topics, but we'll leave enough time for questions. So we'll leave about 15 minutes or so to Q&A at the end. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat.
Yeah.
We can't promise you that we'll address them immediately, but we'll definitely leave time at the end to address any types of questions. So again, around let's say 25 minutes from now, we promise to reach the Q&A session. All right, so the topics we will discuss before that, four topics: tracking everything, discovering nearly nothing, tracking the right stuff wrong. What did you mean by RTFM? I keep
Yeah,
forgetting.
I'm not sure if I can swear here, but it's basically reading the fucking manual on funnels.
Okay, and not adopting product analytics as of day one. Let's jump into things. Okay, and you know what? I'll start. All right. The first topic is something that we see quite a lot, and we call it tracking everything and eventually discovering nearly nothing. This happens. This is actually logical. I don't know if you would agree with me, Glenn, but we see people thinking logically. Again, we're talking to analysts, product managers. These are pretty logical people, and the concept says that whatever we don't track is gonna get lost forever, right? So we have to go very broad and very wide and make sure that we're tracking every single interaction that our user can possibly do with our product. And later on, we'll have all this data, everything is being recorded, then we'll be able to analyze it. And I think this is one of the key problems, and we see it happening all the time because it makes sense in theory. And what happens is that we get a ton of events. They're very broad but very shallow, so there's no depth and no context to them. And that results in a lot of problems. I think the best analogy is that we implement a really broad event table or a lot of different types of events for different interactions. Our expectation is that once we deploy, once we have the analytics deployed in our product and our users are going to start using them, we'll go into our analytics dashboard or the platform that we're using to analyze. We'll dive in and we'll see something like this, right? Everything's going to be colorful. There's going to be insights all over the place. It's just going to be like cherry picking or fishing the really cool fish. And these are the expectations. In most cases, we see something like this, right? If we stay on the water, we see a ton of data, that the water represents the data. So there's a lot of data, a lot of water all around us, but it's really hard to spot things that are insightful, things that are really important or interesting that we can take action on them. And sometimes it even goes in this direction. Sorry, that the things that we do see are outliers that we just happen to hit, and then we come to think that, hey, there must be tons of airplanes underwater because that's what we found when we dove deep enough. So that's the key. That's the beginning of things. So what do you think about that, Glenn? You encounter that?
Yeah, obviously. Like the interesting part is that a lot of people want to collect data, but they actually have no idea what they're looking for. And I kind of this is a very unpopular opinion, I guess, FYI, is that if you look at it, the way the analytics evolved in the last, I would say 3 years, especially with Google Analytics 4 coming to the market. Google Analytics 4 was an event-based or is an event-based measurement platform, which basically does nothing for you or very little. There's no pre-made reportings that people were used to in GA3. So it means that people need to make hypotheses before figuring out how they're going to analyze. So it starts with hypothesis, then figuring out the data, and then going somewhere. A lot of people are used to just tracking everything, are not used to figuring out how to build a hypothesis and to realize it. Usually what we see is how we start with the business and figuring out what are you actually interested in? What are your current hypotheses? And let's track for those hypotheses in order to then make the corals show up the way you presented them, and figuring out like, okay, what are we actually looking for and what's the hypothesis we want to confirm or do the opposite with?
Definitely. I don't think I could agree more. At least we were agreeing on one thing here at the beginning. I think that again, without getting into all the details, I think that one of the key things that I keep trying to push for is to, as kind of like a rule of thumb, is to ask people or to kind of like even preach about it, of doing the minimal amount of events in terms of naming and actually go as deep as possible with the properties so that
Exactly.
you have context, that you have good context to the information that you're getting. Um, but yeah, I think that and the question that and the thing that you mentioned, asking the right questions, we call them strategic questions. There's a saying that you need to focus on defining what you want to understand instead of what you want to measure, even though they
Mm,
sound like almost the same.
they're
But when
not.
you're focusing on what you want to measure, you measure everything, and then when you look at it top to bottom, what you need to understand, then you have to break it down into okay, and then I have to be based on these metrics, and it works much better. But let's move on to the next slide. But you know what? Maybe you should take it from here in terms of the
I'll do that. I'll do that. If you stop sharing, I can take over.
sharing.
Oops. Nope. I don't see everybody anymore, so yell if anything goes wrong. Oops. So we talked about tracking the right stuff, making sure that what we want to understand that we track that's not necessarily what we want to measure. And you also made the remark about I encourage people to track a limited amount of events and use context through properties, which is exactly the next mistake you could make, right? The first step that you have presented was about making sure that we track the stuff that we want to track and not track everything, but track with intent. The next step is like, even though if you track with intent, you could track the right stuff completely wrong, right? This is an example that we pulled out of one of the accounts for one of the clients we used to work for. And on the right-hand side, what you see is, it's a screenshot from Mixpanel, but again, in any other platform, it would essentially be the same. And what you're seeing is what looks or what seems to be an enormous complex query, right? This must be a crazy hypothesis that somebody wants to confirm. Well, unfortunately, it's not true. The only thing that this person was looking into was figuring out how many participants registered and what was the source medium combination for that registration. So basically what they were looking into was breakdowns. Now, the challenge was that they were tracking the right things, but they were tracking it wrong. Their tracking plan, as we call it, was completely suboptimal, which means that the data gets ingested in a format that requires you to recompile things in order to get the insights out of it. Like if you're an analyst and you know that every Monday you have to go through this type of stuff in order to answer basic questions, you're not gonna keep doing this, right? And if you don't keep doing it, you're gonna end up with a failed implementation because you're not gonna get the insights out of the data. When we prepared this slide, Yoav was like, okay, do you see this happen a lot? Because this is like, it kind of seems trivial. We see this mistake happen with people who start in product analytics or who start scaling in product analytics. And the way we solve it is actually by reducing cardinality and exactly doing what Yoav said. Reduce the number of events and provide context through properties. On the left-hand side, we have kind of an example of 20 events that are also part of a setup that we optimize for one of our clients. And we call this high cardinality tracking plans. It means that we have a large unique number of event namings. In this case, we have 20. Now, if you kind of dig into this and start analyzing it, what you feel is, or what you understand very quickly, is that there are two types of events. There's the click part and there's the prompt part, right? This is about paywall. So typically people would see a paywall, which would be the prompt, and then they would click through it, and the fraction would actually be the click-through rate, right? Now, if you optimize this further, you basically end up with two events with a single property, and that property would provide context about that event. So you would get a paywall click where the paywall type would be one of these values. Same for the prompt. Now, what's the result of this? That you basically move from a very complex query, which you have on the left-hand side, to a very simple query that you have on the right-hand side, right? The thing is, even though product analytics tools in general allow you to have a visual builder in order to make very complex queries, they're always linked to the data structure that lies underneath it. So the simpler the data structure, or the more time you take to figure out what are the strategic questions that I want to answer, and how do I simplify my tracking plan by reducing the number of unique events and providing context, the more the product analytics tools can do their work and use the power of the interface in order to surface events or insights easier. Yoav, any comments on that?
Yeah, I think that this represents something that I understand the origin of it, and I think the term that's used a lot is naming convention, right? I think we all heard of naming convention, and naming convention, you know, in its base is something good, right? It's been done to it's a method to put simplicity into
Yeah,
things.
absolutely.
The problem is that it originates from dev team, right? From developers that don't have these types of tools. And actually, when I see naming conventions in analytics implementations, and I can tell you that I've seen implementations that had
So weird stuff.
I had not even weird stuff. I had one with 5,000 events.
Ah, yeah, it's amazing.
So, and the names of the event names are just like you shown here. You know, this
Very
and this.
descriptive, almost flat.
Exactly, and you understand that you just, you know, it so quickly gets out of hand that you can't track it, and it just doesn't work. So yeah, definitely, like we said before, at least what I say that you kind of like repeated it as well. That you know, try to minimize the name of the events, like the types of event, and go as deep as possible with the properties and context.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. The interesting part is when you do a first time implementation, a lot of people are saying like, okay, we have this amount of events because we're tracking everything, right? And the context is not being used through properties. So you get these very flat structures. The thing is, getting that implemented is one thing, maintaining it is a second, but then finding your way in it as an analyst who did not implement it is an absolute nightmare. And so as a result, what you get is you're going to make a lot of mistakes. You potentially could get the data out of there, but you're still going to make interpretation mistakes because you don't know the difference between the 3,000 events or the subset of 100 events that are very similar. So pinpointing a question is very hard, while if you use breakdowns or filters on top of a single event, it's there. The context is there to be filtered down into and not to be summed up.
Yes, definitely. To be fair, there is a way to do this in most of the tools. You can do custom events that kind of like group
Merge
together.
it.
But it's much more complex. It's much easier to break down than to aggregate events. So I definitely recommend you know, adding the properties to be able to break them down.
Yeah. Like the main takeaways I feel for building tracking plans or building a data structure and shipping that data to product analytics tools is usually like simple is better. And think as the person who will analyze it. Because if you're splitting out all the different events in like a million different naming conventions, like how hard will it be for the analyst who was not part of that thinking exercise or that thought exercise to flesh them out again? So that's kind of the idea behind it. Next, sorry for swearing, but not reading the fucking manual when it comes to funnels. It's a question that also when we prepped is like, you have asked me like, do you guys see this a lot? And we actually see it a lot, especially with people who are new to specific products or product tools, product analytics tools, to figuring out like, okay, how does this actually work? And what I mean by this is just a simple mock-up, right? Some dummy data. But there's a fundamental difference between how data is represented in the different reports, right? I've used now Mixpanel again because it's part of my TrackLab setup. Amplitude does the same, GA4 does the same, all the rest of the stuff does the same. But depending on the report you'll choose, the same data might be represented different, and you get different numbers, and it kind of throws people off or it confuses people because they don't necessarily have read the manual about how that specific report interprets and visualizes data. So here in the insights report, you basically get like 7 first-time events and 1 second event. If we would now flip this into a funnel, the same funnel visualization, and I know it's very small, it's not the purpose for you to focus on the details, it's more of a visual representation. even this funnel has two different variations, right? Even though it's actually the same data. And the reason for that is because a lot of the product analytics tools in funnels have different options. Usually it's a difference between uniques and totals, where uniques allows you to say, okay, I want a person to only count a unique event in a funnel, regardless if they have completed it or not within a specific time frame, where totals allows people to re-enter funnels if they have successfully completed a funnel or have adhered to a specific exception rule. And so you basically get these different types of visualizations or results depending on the rules that you apply. It doesn't mean that the data is different. It means that the representation or the rules applied to visualize that data, the restrictions have been applied differently. That being said, there's not only totals, uniques, and sessions. We haven't even talked about the conversion windows, which is also something that throws people off. Conversion windows usually give an idea of like, what's the timeline that people can make in order to complete this funnel? If you combine that by uniques, your count will usually be way lower because people cannot re-enter that funnel within a specific time frame, even though it lasts for 30 days or more. And the last piece is the combination between conversion windows and actually the date picker on the top right, usually in most platforms, where sometimes conversion windows are longer than the date picker window, and that also throws people off. So the main takeaway is like understanding visualizations for funnels. Make sure that you understand, one, that it's fundamentally different from other reports that you have. Yoav probably has a bunch of anecdotes as well on retention reports that actually also have very specific things on how to visualize data. But where insights reports usually try to visualize raw data, or at least total counts, it's easier. Funnel visualizations have specific rules that basically drill down specific sets of data, add conditions to data points and to users who generated them, and as a result, create different variations. So there's kind of three important elements usually when it comes to funnels. Understand how the event count works. Are you unique? Are you on sessions? Are you on totals? Understand how your conversion windows work. Are they short? Are they long? In combination with that, and understand which date picker you're using in combination with the conversion windows. That's kind of the thing that we see a lot when people start building funnels. I know, Yoav, that you said last time, like, okay, we don't see this much. In our case, when we help clients onboard and start their journeys, I would say mostly in scale-ups, right? That are starting to build product analytics, this is something that we see quite a bit. And so our teams are kind of trained already to provide these set of answers.
Yeah, I have to agree. I guess I see it a little bit more in other types of reports. And I have an example of how it looks in retention. You think we got time?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah. Can you stop? Oh, okay. I'll share. Okay. So I'll give you a quick look of how it looks. In a retention report. Okay, and a retention report, in theory, is one of the most critical reports that you can get, right? Because retention is one of the most important value representing report that you can get, right? A user that comes back is usually a user that is happy with the product, that gets value out of it. And one of the key reports is retention report. And a lot of times we see that people don't exactly understand how to read them. Again, I'm also showing mixed panel, but this is on all reports, all analytics platforms have this
the famous music finder, yeah.
Yeah, and this is demo data. It's not, don't worry, I'm not revealing a true client here. But one of the things that about retention report is, I don't know if you guys, I'll show it here, is the famous diagonal, okay? And I'll show it here when we're looking at 7 days. There's this diagonal diagram, okay? And people don't really quite understand, why do we need to do this? Why is there a diagonal? Why don't I see all the days here and days here? Again, I won't go into all the details and all the technical stuff behind it, but basically, the idea behind the retention report is that you want to compare, basically we're comparing different cohorts. So we're taking all the users that came in on this day and all the users comparing on this day, etc. Each one of them is set kind of like in a group. And for all of them, what's important, the thing that we need to understand is not how many of all the people that came in yesterday, how many came in today, but in most cases, it's about the first day or first event or first instance of something and how long it took the users to come back after. Or actually, usually the question that we ask is when did they leave? When did they churn? When did they leave us forever?
It's the opposite of retention, right?
Exactly. And that's why it's important not to compare the same day, but actually the first day after. Okay, so that's why we see it here, and this is like the average of all of them together. And another thing that we see a lot of people making mistakes is that this little thing here that they've actually changed it so many times that the name of this feature, because it's really hard to understand.
And documentation is still a bit outdated, by the way, depending on where you look. Yeah.
Yeah, it was unbound retention, and they had a few names for that. But basically, I think the name right now represents pretty well the concept. And basically, what it says right now, when it shows you got on or after or on. Okay, when we see on or after, basically it means that out of all the users that came in once or did play song for the first time within this time frame, okay, and within the last 10 days. By the way, it's within the last 10 days. It doesn't mean that it was the first time that they've ever done that, right? There is a filter for that, but we're not going to go into that. Too short of a session to go into that. But out of them, we can say that within the first day, we got around 85% that came in on the same day or after, okay? And let's say on day 3, which means 3 days from then, we had about 37%. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that if someone came in, the first time they came in was on Sunday, then, we have Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, and we got 37% of the people that came in on Sunday came back on Wednesday. No, it means that they came in at least on Wednesday or after. Okay, so if we change it to on, we see that the numbers drop significantly, and now we're supposed to drop. They drop, yeah, now it's 18%. Okay, so these are the users that came in on exactly the third day after doing the first instance. Okay, usually what this should represent, by the way, is actually churn. Okay, so what we can understand from here, it's not 100% correct, but don't have time to go into all the details. What this represents is that we're seeing 37% retention on or after, but it actually represents 63% churn. So 63% of our users have left and were never seen again after the third day. That's usually the important context of this report. Yeah, so take it back, Glenn.
If you stop sharing, I like this report a lot, and it's a fair comment that you made. They've shared it it's been changed quite a lot. So it was confusing already for people, and the change didn't necessarily help, right? You should be seeing my screen, so we should be okay.
Yeah.
To go to the last thing, which is, I think because the people are here, it should be a no-brainer, but still want to close off with that. Not investing in the practice of product analytics as of day one. This is an actual email that we got from somebody who contacted us, was very motivated to actually start with product analytics, a SaaS company, but basically got held back by management, saying that, well, we don't believe that the product team should have their hands on the data, which kind of worries me, because then we come to this quote, very famous quote by Alex, when you don't have tracking, you're not marketing, you're just gambling, right? The thing that we see is that usually product teams are afraid to start with product analytics early because the volumes are low. I don't believe in the beginning it is about the volumes, because product analytics in general is fairly to very, if not cheap, when you start having small volumes. And it's about the practice of actually building a development cycle and a release cycle with product analytics embedded in that. If you need to start fitting product analytics processes into something after you have launched and after you have found your routines and your way of working, I promise you it will be very hard, and it will be even harder to actually maintain it, to keep it documented, and to keep best practices. Also, even though you have low volumes of data, it's always better than having nothing. It could give you a hunch in which direction your product is moving, on top of the gut feeling that you'll be using a bit more in the beginning anyways. So my takeaway on that is that an existing process is harder to change. So try to put product analytics in there from the start. That way you don't have to go through that pain of change. Adopt best practices immediately. What I mean by that is please don't put stuff live without tracking it. If you have a new module in your product, if you have a new feature that you're going to put live, eventually somebody will ask, what's the impact of that release on my revenue, on my signups, on my retention? And if you didn't track it, it will be gambling to figure out how much that impact actually is. And last but not least, we're in the business of product. We're not in the business of gambling. So try to put in product analytics in there as of day one.
Yeah, just to comment on that, I definitely agree with you. I think that we see that happening a lot. Actually, see it from the other way around. So that there is a sort of advantage, you can say, of not having data, right? Because when you don't have data, then I'm calling it treading lightly. Okay, so you're making assumptions. You know that you're going on assumptions. You know that there's a good chance that you're wrong. But there's an advantage because nobody can tell you that you're wrong, right? Because there's no data to show, and it feels to you right, and it looks great, and the site is amazing. Why? Because I think so, and I asked my friend and all the UI team and all the designers said
They
it's
find it
good.
amazing.
That's great. Let's keep it that way. When you do start to add data into the mix, there's always ups and downs to it, right? Because data. I'd say it doesn't lie. Data doesn't lie if it's correct. Okay, that's a big if, because a lot of times we see a lot of problems with that, with validation, and again, maybe we can do a whole webinar on validation because it's a huge problem. We encounter it a lot that the data simply isn't correct. But when the data is there, it doesn't lie, and you know point us into and reaffirm things that we're thinking and our hypothesis. And sometimes it just goes the other way. But I think that's part of the work, right? Especially for product managers. We know that not everything that we're going to do is going to have the impact that we expect it to have. And it's not binary. So even if something doesn't work, it still doesn't mean that, it's a complete failure, because specifically with analytics, with data in general, it can guide you to, okay, where are the problems, where are the pitfalls, where are the places where our users are dropping off, where they're not understanding or they're not returning based on them. And I think that can give you a lot of insights that are actionable in that sense. So
Yeah.
definitely, yeah.
Definitely. I think everybody, when they start with product analytics, they're looking for the aha moments, and they think that they need a large amount of data. I like to think when you start that you're actually looking for the opposite of aha moments. You're looking for the friction and removing it, because the better you can remove it, the more volumes you'll get faster. And then you can look for that aha moment. So yeah, kind of agree with that.
Yeah, trying to find a aha moment is very difficult. I can say from experience that it's very hard. And on the other side of things, finding places like we have a huge drop is actually easier to identify. It's not necessarily going to be easy to fix, but at least you know where the problem is. That's a big part of it. Okay, I think we'll go and
bunch of questions coming in. Let's go over them.
All right.
So are the product analytics tools built in a way that simplifies our ability to analyze the data with breakdowns based on the properties? I'm referring to funnel pattern analysis, etc., etc. Yes, they are. I'm going to see if I can do a small change here. But basically, the way I like to think of it is when we talk about event taxonomy in general, it's for me, it's easier, or I find it in general easier to break events down than to assemble different events and make a sum out of it. I'll try to, I'm not sure if I actually have a data set that allows me, bear with me, to show you this.
I can say in the meanwhile, while you're looking for things that, so to answer Ari's question, yes, the answer is yes. It's built specifically for that. You can sometimes even add more custom properties and things that are a bit more complex to actually add even more context. But it's always based on properties that you already implemented. So the deeper you get in the properties in terms of the context of the event, usually the better it will be in the way that you can, slice and dice your data. And the breakdown, again, is one of the features that I use all of the time, regardless of whether it's
exactly. And I don't have a proper setup here. Obviously, this is my TrackLab setup, but basically what you can see is if I would open it up a bit further, maybe. So it's not my good sandbox. Well, so basically what I did here is I have one event, which is cute, very bad name, but doesn't really matter for the sake of the exercise. But here I break it down by distinct ID, right? And you can do this with any other property. Distinct ID in the context of Mixpanel is a built-in thing, but imagine that you have one single event such as paywall selected, and you would have the paywall type. Then the simple thing to do would be here, paywall selected, break it down by paywall type, and you would have a fantastic distribution of what things look like. You can do bar charts, you can do whatever, and you don't need to figure out how to assemble all of these events, because the problem with assembling events to make a sum is if the analyst is unaware or forgets one, then your whole analysis is wrong. It's easier to start with something that bundles everything and break it from there because it will be built in. And actually product analytics tools are actually built. I always call them like the SQL builders for non-SQL people. And it's actually what it's doing. It's doing that. Show me all the events where the event names equal viewed and break it down by and then a parameter. So that's a very important element.
So what I'm, Glenn, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
This is Ari. To follow up on this question, I put there in my parenthesis at the end of the question, I said, not simply counting events, which is exactly what you're showing now. For the funnel, for example, I have page display, okay? Yes, an event name, and then the properties will actually include the page name, okay? So when I create a funnel, I basically show one step is page display, and the second step is also page display, and the third step is also page display, and basically that will be the funnel. But the question is if you can show how I can see a funnel with the same event being in each step, but the only difference between those is the property value.
You should be able to do that by selecting the event and drilling or narrowing it down by one of the parameters. Alternatively, you could create a custom event out of that, depending on which tool you use. Create a custom event out of it to surface as a new event and then break it out that way.
Try to show it. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. So what I've done here is exactly what you said, Ari. Okay.
You go to the filter.
No, I'm not filtering it. I'm actually, so this is kind of like a YouTube example of kind of like YouTube, right? So there's, or is it Spotify? Sorry, it's kind of like Spotify. All right, so you got song play, another song play, another song play. Now you want to say, okay, I don't want just the song play. I want to, by filter to say, okay, I want to look at a song play by a certain artist, let's say Bach, and then the other one, and then would it be followed by a song played by a different artist or a different song or a different price or a different even region, okay, or even duration that, let's say, I want it to be more than 30 seconds. Okay, so yeah, I could break it down by, again, it's not breaking down, it's filtering, but by the way, I can also break it down. Does that answer your question, Ari?
Yeah, I believe so. I expected that, but just wanted to see. Thank you.
By the way, what I can also do is I can do it by, let's say, genre. Okay, and now I see, well, the display isn't that great, but I can see here that I can see the conversion by each genre. So the converting from hip hop, if all the songs are hip hop, well, I can decide if it's first touch, last touch. Again, I'm not going to go into all of them, but this time is for the first touch. So if the first song is hip hop, rock, electric, whatever, what's the conversion rate?
But this breakdown is for the first event, right? For the step one.
Yeah, this is for the first event, but I can always, change it for each one individually.
Yeah, you can also keep it stable, saying that if the first genre would be hip hop, then show me the rest of the funnel, song played for hip hop genre.
Yeah, exactly. So if I keep, I don't know if you've seen it, but I've added hold constant the genre property, then it stays the same. And yeah, definitely.
That would be kind of an analysis to figure out which genre is the most sticky or something, right?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Great. Okay, we have a question from Sharon. Should the configuration of event types and properties, what you referred to as naming convention, happen on the analysis tools, aka full story mix panel, or on the data level? So you need to do it on the data level, okay? The distinction here between tools like full story and mix panel, which I'll explain. In tools like mix panel, by the way, also in full story, if you do it by server side, the event definition or firing the events, then yeah, you need to do that. You need to be the one who says, okay, when this event was fired, when a song was played, I want to track not just the event. Well, the way that the code looks like, mix panel track the event name would be song played, and then you'll have properties, genre equals hip hop or rock or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you need to define that. Your developers need to define that. In tools like full story, it's pretty much the same if you're doing it by server side. If you're doing it by the visual editor that full story enables you to do, kind of like look at what users are doing, watch their sessions, and define events on the fly. So you're saying a user click on a button and say, okay, I want you to from now on call this event button clicked or payment button clicked, whatever. It's a bit more complex to add properties. It's one of the downsides of what we call auto tracking.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's one of those things that you win a little bit and you lose a little bit, and you need to choose how deep you want to go. By the way, for that reason, my tendency, again, it's not always this way, but if it's a more complex product that I need a lot of context, in most cases, I won't go with auto tracking, tools like Full Story or Heap, for example, even though they are advancing and they have more capabilities in terms of properties, still it's not as, it doesn't allow you the flexibility that actually defining it.
I agree. Plus, you don't control the change, right? If a release happens, the end result in your analytics platform might look completely different because the auto track capturing different things differently.
Exactly. I hope we answered that question. Sharon, just give us a thumbs up or some indication that you're good on that. Okay, do you want to take the next one?
Can you also explain on how to create the funnel? I think we've had that. If we are not tracking everything, how should a designer use analytics for research on user flows? Once they would like to validate an assumptions, they won't have a tracing history. I think it's kind of the chicken or the egg, but again, it's a philosophy, right? And I can be wrong here, so I would be very interested to hear that, and also your opinion, Yoav. But if a designer does something in general, he or she would do something with an intent. So there would be a hypothesis behind it. I want to design it this way in order to achieve this result. And with that intention, you basically have what we call the user story, what you guys call strategic questions. Is this contributing to X, or is this design contributing to a specific behavior? And if we then think back about product analytics, at that point, if it is a strategic question or a user story, de facto tracking should be linked to it. So in a lot of cases, what we advise is that if designers build specific modules or variations, then de facto there will be tracking on it, because what they're trying to do is they're already designing for a specific hypothesis. So that's kind of my take on it. You want to share your thoughts, Yoav?
Yeah, I think, by the way, I get this a lot, and it's a good question, because I think that the opposite of, there's tracking everything, and the opposite of tracking everything is not, tracking just 10%, not nothing. Nobody expects us to track nothing, but it's not 10%, right? It's, in most cases, by the way, when you track top to bottom, that's the way that I call it, going from the strategic question, the things you want to understand, and then, going down deeper and deeper into how you're going to track that, and how are you going to answer, what are the data points that you're going to need in order to be able to answer them. I think that what will usually happen is that you will have to, it will be part of the plan. Okay, so if a key, it's, by the way, it's not necessarily even an assumption that you will make, right? I mean, if it's important for you to understand the user flow, okay, so what users are doing, where they're dropping off, which features they're using, yes or not, it's part of what you have to do. It's not that you're going to track everything. You're going to say, okay, I want to understand which features or what happens before what. Okay, so I will say I need to track all of these specific events or user interactions, but also I need to, just give you an example, I need to know, it's really important for me to know users that came into this screen, what was the screen that happened before that. Okay, so sometimes what I would do is actually add that as a property to the event, even though I can do that with funnels and I can do that with flowcharts. But still, if I want to say, I just want to look at users that came into this page, but the previous page was, let's give an example, a purchase page, or was the previous page, but now they went into a Q&A page. Okay, so I want to look what happens. I want to try to analyze what happened after the Q&A page to those that came from a specific page. Okay, so yeah, most of the things, if you're doing a thorough planning and strategic planning or analytics, you will cover, let's say, at least 80% of all the interactions that the user can do, but it's in a planned fashion. Okay, so every event already serves a specific question, so you know why it's there for. And by that, it means that you'll have most of the context that you will need for the questions that you can anticipate beforehand.
Yeah. And one thing I want to add, because we're talking about pathing basically, or flowing, whatever you want to call it, flow reports, they look stunning. They're a piece of engineering marvel, but usually what I find very personally is that if you go in and look for something in it without a question to start with, that you get lost because it's absolute spaghetti. And so it is one of the reports that is good at visualizing the relationship, but you'll get completely lost. So I like kind of the idea, what you say, to have the context of the previous section in a data point, because then you can stick to the single data points, and the properties will provide the context around a data point, and you don't have to build the relationship between the data points as such. And again, in the end, we come down to breakdowns. So works fine for me.
I have to be honest and say that I agree with you. Flowcharts are amazing. They look great. It looks like, wow, this is great. But the number of times that I actually use them are very, very limited. They have a lot of internal flaws within them. You can see they make you feel like the users are following a certain flow, which isn't necessarily true. Again, I'm not saying that they're changing reality, but sometimes, I'll give you an example, okay? If you have a user, let's say you only have one user in your product, okay? And that user came in, and the first time he came into the homepage, and then he went into the video page, okay? And that was his whole session. And tomorrow he comes in, goes into the home page, and then goes into the payment page, okay? In the flow chart, you will see a user that goes into the home. You will see home, video watch, or whatever I said was the second thing, and then purchase. Even though this sequence never happened, right? But you know, that's the way that it does it, because it looks on at an individual level. So it could be a bit misleading. Yeah, if you're looking for something really, really specific, what if I use it? It's usually when I kind of like hide every event except for one or two. I just want to see the different flows between specific events broken down by properties, for example.
Yeah, right. Exactly the designer conversation you had before. Like I've made this new thing and I would expect traffic to divert more in one direction than previously in the past to another direction. And at that point, a flow chart would be very helpful. But in my experience, like we said, going in without a question in mind is gonna really it's gonna get you lost.
All right, we still have okay, one last question. Hey, do you have any tips or hints on how to simulate analysis when implementing just the right enough of properties before testing in practice? I understand that. The context concerns, the limited engineering capacity devoted to this work, and often can't be reiterated over time. What's your take on this?
It's a hard one. In general, like I'll approach it from I'm implementing product analytics and I'm deploying for the very first time, but I have engineering capacity limitations. I'll approach it like that, right? Usually what we look into is, or we often say there's two levels of things you want to track. There is the milestones in the customer journey. A user signs up, a user does a payment, a user does anything that is really meaningful, the way you have thought about designing your product, right? Those are the things where, at least in my head, your engineering capacity should go first to. Why? Because those drive the business. It could be the difference between zero revenue or revenue, actually. And then you have the layer of purely behavioral data, like a user selected a call to action, they selected a top, they use a drop down, they use these type of features that are all shiny, but there are more behavioral elements, right? If you have limited engineering capacity, my bet would always be on those customer journey milestones because they drive the business and you can keep tabs of how healthy is my flow, where the rest at that point will be more nice to have because they will have an impact on how the milestones or the customer journey milestones will behave, but they won't say anything about what's the number of people who actually sign up, who actually pay, etc., etc., etc. And the more you get visibility on that under layer, the more in general, we see that you get buy-in for the additional elements to be tracked, because the additional elements to be tracked are are harder to value. I don't know if that actually was clear, but voila. Yeah.
I think it's clear. It's interesting because I look at it a bit differently. I'd say maybe I even disagree with you.
Okay.
Because I think that what you're saying is basically, you know, kind of like do the salami approach, right? So saying like a foot in the door in terms of developer time and you know, getting some info and then saying, hey, you know what, I need more to get in depth. I'm not saying it's not right, but I think that sometimes, you know, I used to be really, really against auto tracking. Okay, and I would say, you know what, you know, if it's a really, really simple site, like I don't know, promotional site, something that you know you can't do too much in it. All right, fine, do auto tracking. You know, it saves you time. You don't need to define anything. It's very simple. Lately, I've seen that you know you need to look reality in the eye, right, and see that a lot of times, you know, the problems and the limitations of capacity of dev work, even though I think it's almost you know overrated or over exaggerated the amount of time that's needed.
Yeah, I agree.
Analytics. It usually takes I don't know a few days, but you know, but we're not going to get into that. But I think that sometimes you need to understand that some companies, it's not even a matter of time. It just means that, they're telling me, look, to be honest, if I want to implement this, it's going to be in sprint number 70, and today we're in sprint number 50. And it will happen. It's just going to be in,
See you in 2 years.
now,
Yeah.
and I can't wait for that. So for these types of organizations, and again, there are a lot of them. Actually, the bigger organizations have that problem. Sometimes I say, you know what? Let's do auto tracking. Let's start with that. Some auto tracking tools like Full Story keep actually doing or really, really improving on that. Kind of like moves all the work to you, the product person. Again, there's advantages and disadvantages. It gives you more work. But if it's a website, okay, I'm not going to go into applications because those are a big mess. But if it's a website, a lot of times you can get most of the stuff with, a visual, how do you call it? A visual labeling.
Yeah.
So you kind of like have an overlay over your site, and you say, okay, you know what? When someone clicks on this button, give it this name.
Visual tagger, that's the name.
Yeah. Again, it's far from being optimal. It has a lot of flaws. Properties are really, really poor there. You can add a little bit, but it has to be something that's on the screen and you can take from the UI. Otherwise, it's really hard. You can't use super properties. Again, we're not going to go into all the technical details. But sometimes it's better than nothing or even having to wait for the implementation. So I don't know. It depends. And these tools are getting better. I still think they're not, again, at par with let's say Mixpanel and Amplitude in terms of the capacity and depth that you can go in the analysis or visualization power. But they're getting there, and they're getting to, I don't know, around 80-90%, which is, who knows where we're going to be in 2 or 3 years with AI and everything. Maybe AI will know how to do that on its own and just implement all the properties on its own. There are already, by the way, I have to add one more thing. There are already tools like Fresh Paint, and there's also Convisit, which is an Israeli company, a really cool company. That what they're doing is they're telling you, you know what, you can use Mixpanel or Amplitude, but we'll do the auto tracking for you. And it's not a dumb auto tracking, but it's actually something that's smart. It's AI, machine learning driven, and it knows pretty well how to identify the different elements. And then for the point that you mentioned, Glenn, if you change the implementation, you change things around in terms of UI and stuff like that, it still knows how to match the right items to the right events. So it works pretty well. I think there's going to be a lot of improvement on that aspect.
Yeah, I've seen them in action. It's interesting that there's like product analytics today has their own data collection layers, their implementation layers and SDKs, and it's kind of like there's a mid-segment section coming to like behavioral collection layers as a standalone to then ship it to a destination, be it a warehouse or be it a product analytics tool. As such, doesn't really matter, but it's an interesting evolution. Yeah, I agree.
All right, guys, I think our time is up.
Yes.
So sorry, Ari, maybe you could reach out to us later and try to help you with that. Thank you, everyone, for joining. It's been fun. Thank you, Glenn. It's been a pleasure to have someone talk to. And
thank you for having me.
Of course. Let's do this. Let's do this again. And you guys, let us know if it was good, if it wasn't good. Did you enjoy it? Did you feel it gave you value? Give us honest feedback. We're looking for it, even if it means you guys suck and you wasted our time. We can handle it.
Yeah, we'll be fine. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
And if you want to reach us, I'll write in my email. Glenn, please put in yours as well in the comment. So if anybody wants to reach us, they can do that. And yeah, and on LinkedIn as well, of course. All right, guys, have a great day. Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.